If you've got $5, I'll quit right now. Otherwise, take your homeless self back to the sidewalk. Derek Halverson flicked the bill from his wallet, letting it drift down in front of Elias Boone's worn boots like trash. A few customers laughed. Someone muttered, "Why do they even let them in here?" The security guard's hand pressed against Elias's shoulder, guiding him away from the teller line as if he were contagious. Derek leaned closer, mint on his breath, contempt in his eyes. "This bank wasn't built for people like you." Elias didn't reach for the money. He lifted his eyes instead, to the name carved in stone above the marble wall, while the man humiliating him had no idea he was standing on the legacy Elias built. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The midday sun streamed through bright riverbank's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Elias Boone shuffled into the busy lobby, his worn coat hanging loose on his thin frame. A battered leather folder was tucked carefully under his arm, its edges frayed from years of use. From behind the glass walls of his corner office, Derek Halverson's eyes narrowed as he watched the elderly man take his place in line. The regional manager adjusted his silk tie, lips curling with distaste, as he noticed several well-dressed customers giving Elias a wide berth. The line moved slowly. Elias stood patiently, one hand gripping his folder, while the other steadied himself on his walking stick. He observed the grand lobby he remembered from decades ago, though now the warm woods had been replaced with cold steel and glass. The original brass fixtures were gone, switched out for chrome that gleamed almost aggressively under the fluorescent lights. When Elias finally reached the counter, teller Pam Hargrove's welcoming smile froze, then fell away entirely. She straightened her blazer and cleared her throat. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried just enough edge to make it clear help wasn't really being offered. "Yes, please," Elias said softly, but clearly. "I'd like to open a checking account." His dignified tone seemed to catch her off guard. "Do you have proper identification?" Pam's words dripped with doubt. "I do." Elias began to reach for his folder. The sharp tap of expensive shoes on marble announced Derek Halverson's approach, before his booming voice filled the lobby. "Is there a problem here?" He didn't address Elias directly, speaking instead to Pam while looking at the elderly man like something scraped off his shoe. "This gentleman wants to open an account," Pam explained, emphasizing gentleman with barely concealed sarcasm. "Oh, really?" Derek's laugh was loud enough to draw attention from everyone in line. "And what kind of account were you hoping to open?" He gave an exaggerated sniff. "The shelter is actually across town, if that's what you're looking for." Elias remained steady, his voice calm. "A checking account. I have $5 to deposit." The lobby grew quieter as more customers turned to watch. Derek's smile widened, cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. He gestured subtly to Luis Ortega, the security guard, who reluctantly moved closer to the counter. $5 whole? Derek's voice dripped with mock amazement. My. We don't usually see such substantial initial deposits from your—" He paused meaningfully. "Type." Elias's eyes drifted to the large bronze plaque mounted prominently on the wall behind the teller stations. The bank's community mission statement was engraved there, promising equal service to all members of the community. He'd written those words himself, decades ago. "The minimum opening deposit is $5, Elias stated simply. "It always has been." Derek leaned forward, placing both hands on the counter. His cologne was overwhelming at this distance. "Listen here. This is a respectable institution. We have standards to maintain. Perhaps you didn't notice our other customers?" He gestured broadly at the lobby. "They don't come in here smelling like they've been sleeping in dumpsters." As if on cue, a well-dressed white man in his 40s approached the next teller window. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," Derek called out warmly. "How's that new boat treating you?" "Just wonderful, Derek. About to deposit the registration fees now." "Excellent, excellent. Let us know if you need anything." Derek's entire demeanor had transformed, all sunshine and professional courtesy. Then he turned back to Elias, the smile vanishing. "You see? That's our typical clientele." Throughout the exchange, Elias remained perfectly still, studying Derek with eyes that missed nothing. The younger man's show of authority, the carefully maintained power dynamics, the casual cruelty meant to impress watching customers. It was all familiar. He'd seen it before, decades ago, in other faces. Slowly, deliberately, Elias reached into his coat pocket. The security guard tensed, but Elias withdrew only a crisp $5 bill. He placed it carefully on the counter, smoothing it with one weathered hand. The lobby had gone completely silent now. Even the clicks of computer keyboards had stopped. Everyone was watching the scene unfold. Derek stared at the money, then threw back his head and laughed. "Oh, this is rich." He spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. "Tell you what, since you've managed to scrounge up $5 whole." He paused for effect, his voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. "If you have $5, Derek announced with a smirk, "I'll quit." The tension in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Some customers looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with uncomfortable fascination. Luis Ortega shifted his weight uneasily, his hand resting on his belt, while Pam busied herself straightening already neat stacks of deposit slips. The cruel words hung in the air, a public challenge that Derek clearly expected would send the shabby old man shuffling away in defeat. But Elias didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his $5 on the counter between them, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. Derek's laughter echoed through the lobby as more customers pulled out their phones, trying to be subtle as they recorded the confrontation. The $5 bill lay pristine on the counter between them, a small green rectangle that had somehow become the center of this mounting tension. "Let me make this perfectly clear," Derek announced, straightening his designer tie. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our institutional standards." His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone used to making unpleasant things sound official. "It's policy." Several customers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a business suit looked down at her shoes. An elderly couple whispered to each other, their faces pinched with concern. "I'd like to see that policy," Elias said quietly, his dignity unchanged. "Could you show me where it's written?" Derek's jaw tightened. He turned toward Luis, who stood rigid and uncertain near the counter. "Mr. Ortega, please move this individual along. He's disrupting business." Luis took a hesitant step forward, his face betraying his discomfort. "Sir, if you could—" "The policy," Elias repeated calmly. "I'm sure Mr. Halverson can point to the specific regulation." His use of Derek's name caused the manager's eyebrows to rise slightly. "Listen here," Derek sneered, leaning closer. "This isn't a soup kitchen. We don't need to explain ourselves to every vagrant who wanders in off the street. Security will escort you out, or the police can do it instead." The lobby had grown so quiet that the soft scrape of Elias's folder opening seemed unusually loud. With careful movements, he withdrew several yellowed papers and laid them on the counter beside the $5 bill. The documents were clearly old but well preserved, their edges crisp despite their age. Derek glanced dismissively at the papers, then did a double-take. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized official incorporation seals and signatures. At the bottom of one document was a black-and-white photograph showing a younger Elias standing proudly in front of the original Bright River Bank building, surrounded by the first board of directors. "Clearly, these are fake," Derek announced, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Sir, if you're confused about—" Bright River Bank was originally called River Valley Savings and Trust, Elias interrupted softly. The first branch was at 1242 Mason Street, now demolished. Article 7, Section 3 of the original charter includes specific protections for founding members, including— He recited the exact legal language of a clause that made Derek's face go pale. Pam's fingers flew across her keyboard, her hands trembling slightly as she accessed the bank's internal records. The line behind Elias had grown longer, but no one complained. People leaned forward, phones still recording, as the scene unfolded. "That's quite enough," Derek snapped, reaching for the documents. "These obvious forgeries—" "Please don't touch those," Elias said with quiet authority. "They're originals." More employees had gathered behind the counter now, watching the confrontation with growing unease. A young loan officer whispered something to her colleague, who shook his head in disbelief. Pam's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension. Her screen displayed an old employee file, one that had been buried deep in the system but never deleted. There was no mistaking the younger version of Elias in the profile photo, or the title beneath it. Boone Elias, founder. Mr. Halverson. Pam's voice shook slightly as she turned the monitor toward him. "He's in our records." Derek's face hardened as he stared at the screen, his carefully maintained expression of authority cracking around the edges. The same information was now displayed on several other employee terminals as curious staff members searched the database. Luis had backed away from Elias, his hand dropping from his belt. Other customers continued recording, their phones capturing every moment of Derek's obvious discomfort. The power dynamic in the lobby had shifted palpably, like air pressure dropping before a storm. The $5 bill still sat untouched on the counter, but now the worn leather folder beside it carried the weight of history. Elias stood exactly as he had before, leaning slightly on his walking stick, watching Derek with eyes that had seen decades of banking practices unfold in this very building. A young mother in line hugged her child closer, witnessing the scene. An older businessman closed his portfolio, all thoughts of his deposit forgotten as he watched. The usual sounds of a busy bank, shuffling papers, clicking keyboards, murmured conversations, had all ceased, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the barely audible sound of phone cameras recording. Derek's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the counter, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light. The careful facade of authority he'd cultivated was crumbling, and everyone in the lobby could see it. His earlier mockery hung in the air like a boomerang, spinning back toward him with increasing speed. The documentation on the counter seemed to mock Derek's previous arrogance. The incorporation papers, the founding photograph, the signatures that had shaped this institution, they all testified to a history he'd ignored, a legacy he'd disrespected. His face had transformed from smug superiority to rigid hostility as the truth became undeniable. Pam's whispered words had shattered his control of the situation, and now Derek stood frozen, trapped between his earlier cruelty and the growing realization of exactly whom he had tried to humiliate. Derek grabbed Elias's elbow, his fingers digging in with unnecessary force. "Step into my office," he commanded through clenched teeth. The lobby had become uncomfortably silent, watching the confrontation unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Luis trailed behind them, his security badge catching the fluorescent light. His dark eyes darted between Derek and Elias, clearly torn between his duty and his conscience. The young guard's hand rested uneasily on his belt as Derek practically dragged Elias toward the manager's desk. "Sit," Derek ordered, pointing to a chair. When Elias remained standing, Derek's face flushed darker. "Fine. You claim to be Elias Boone? Prove it. Show me current identification." Elias reached into his worn coat pocket with deliberate slowness. He produced a weathered wallet, removing an old driver's license. The plastic was scratched, The photo faded, but the name and face were clear enough. Next came a yellowed letter, signed by the original board of directors, thanking Elias for his visionary leadership. Derek snatched both items, examining them with exaggerated skepticism. His manicured fingers left smudges on the old license. These could be fakes. Anyone could forge. "Call Harold Whitmore," Elias suggested quietly. "He'll remember me." Derek's eyes narrowed, but he reached for his desk phone. He punched in numbers with sharp, angry jabs, putting the call on speaker. The ring echoed through the tense office. Whitmore, speaking. The voice that answered was smooth and cultured, carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Derek Halverson at the downtown branch. We have a situation." Derek's tone had shifted to something more deferential. "There's someone here claiming to be Elias Boone." A heavy pause filled the line. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice carried a dismissive chuckle. "Elias Boone? That's unexpected and quite impossible." "Hello, Harold," Elias said clearly. Another pause, shorter this time. "Ah, I see." Whitmore's voice hardened slightly. "Mr. Boone sold his interests in this institution many years ago. If someone is there claiming otherwise, they are either confused or not well." Derek's confidence visibly grew with each of Whitmore's words. "He has some old documents, which mean nothing," Whitmore cut in smoothly. "The sale was completely legal. All shares were transferred. If this person is disrupting business, you should handle it appropriately." "Thank you, sir." Derek's smile had turned predatory. He ended the call and stood, straightening his suit jacket. "You heard Mr. Whitmore. You have no standing here." Through the glass walls, customers were still watching, phones still recording. A young woman in business attire was typing rapidly on her phone, uploading what she'd captured. The video would be viral before the hour was out. "This man," Derek announced loudly as he stepped back into the lobby, "is trespassing. He's disrupting legitimate business with false claims." He turned to Luis. "Please escort him from the premises, for everyone's safety." Luis shifted uncomfortably, his dark eyes meeting Elias's. "Sir, I don't think—" "Are you refusing to do your job?" Derek's voice carried a clear threat. "Because that can be addressed immediately." Luis's shoulders slumped slightly. He had rent due next week, a sister in college. "Please come with me, sir," he said quietly to Elias. More phones appeared as Luis gently took Elias's arm. The contrast between Luis's careful touch and Derek's earlier roughness was stark. Elias didn't resist. He moved slowly but steadily toward the exit, his eyes drawn again to the mission statement mounted on the wall. The words seemed to mock the scene. "Serving our community with integrity since 1978. Elias studied them as if measuring the distance between promise and reality, between what he'd built and what it had become. The automatic doors slid open, letting in a blast of hot air. Traffic noise flooded the lobby, cars honking, buses hissing, the city moving relentlessly forward. Derek stood watching, arms crossed, victory etched in his stance. But before stepping out, Elias turned. His movements were unhurried as he leaned closer to Derek. The manager instinctively pulled back, but Elias's words reached him clearly. "I didn't come for $5. I came for accountability." The harsh sunlight swallowed Elias's figure as he stepped outside. The automatic doors whispered shut behind him, leaving Derek standing in the artificial cool of the lobby. The $5 bill still lay on the counter where it all began, now surrounded by scattered papers and forgotten transaction slips. Luis remained by the door, his posture rigid with discomfort. Other employees pretended to be busy, but their movements were mechanical, distracted. The customers who had witnessed everything were still frozen in place, their phones gradually lowering as the scene concluded. Derek tugged at his tie, trying to project authority despite the sweat beading at his temples. He cleared his throat. "Next customer, please," he called out, as if nothing unusual had happened. But his voice carried a slight tremor that hadn't been there before. The young woman who had uploaded the video was now showing it to the person next to her. Their whispered conversation carried just far enough. "Did you see how he treated that old man? And he's the founder?" A rustle of movement spread through the lobby as people began sharing the video, forwarding it, posting it to social media. The story was already spreading beyond these walls, beyond Derek's control. The artificial quiet of the bank lobby felt like the eye of a growing storm. The blue light from Naomi's phone cast shadows across her living room as she scrolled through her social media feed. Empty takeout containers littered her coffee table. Another late dinner after a long day chasing leads at the newspaper. A video auto-played, the sounds of a bank lobby filling her apartment. Her thumb froze mid-scroll. The elderly man in the worn coat. She knew that face. Even through the shaky phone footage, she recognized the dignified tilt of his chin, the careful way he held himself. Her grandfather, Elias Boone. "Oh my God," she whispered, turning up the volume. The footage was damning. The sneering bank manager, the casual cruelty, the forced removal. Comments flooded the video. "Another entitled boomer making trouble. Who shows up with $5 nowadays? Bet he's just confused and lost. That manager should be fired." Naomi's hands shook as she watched it again. And again. 5 years since she'd last seen him. 5 years of believing he'd abandoned their family, walked away from everything he'd built. But here he was, being humiliated in the very bank he'd founded. She grabbed her keys, knocking over a cold cup of coffee in her haste. Her journalist instincts kicked in. She had contacts, ways to trace people. 3 phone calls later, she had an address. A boarding house in the old part of town where rent was cheap and questions were few. The drive took 20 minutes. Naomi rehearsed her anger in the car, all the things she'd wanted to say for years. About leaving them, about the silence, about her grandmother dying without him there. The boarding house was a faded Victorian, paint peeling around sagging window frames. Window units hummed against the evening heat. A flickering porch light illuminated the worn steps as Naomi climbed them. Room 2B, she knocked sharply. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried. The door opened, and there he was, closer than he'd been in years. Elias looked tired, the day's confrontation weighing on his shoulders, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Naomi." He said her name softly, like a prayer. $5? Her voice cracked. "You show up after all these years for $5? He stepped back, holding the door wider. "Come in, please." The room was small but meticulously organized. A narrow bed, a desk covered in papers, walls lined with filing cabinets. No photos, no personal touches. It looked more like an office than a home. "Why?" Naomi demanded, standing rigid just inside the door. "Why did you leave us? Why are you living like this? What was that scene at the bank about?" Elias settled heavily into a desk chair, gesturing for her to take the room's only other seat. "I never left. Not really. You disappeared." "I was forced out," he corrected quietly. "Legally cornered. They threatened to destroy the bank's reputation, to drag your grandmother's name through the mud, to make sure your mother never worked in finance again." Naomi's journalism training kicked in. "Who threatened you?" "Harold Whitmore, the board. They saw an opportunity when the recession hit. Used it to push me out, change the bank's direction. But they made a mistake." He reached for a filing cabinet drawer. "They thought I'd just fade away." He pulled out a thick binder, then another, and another. Each was carefully labeled with dates spanning the past 5 years. I stayed close, he continued, opening the first binder. Watched, gathered evidence, built a case. Naomi leaned forward, professional instincts overtaking personal hurt. The binders contained loan denial letters, printed emails, spreadsheets tracking foreclosure patterns. Her trained eye caught the coding, certain neighborhoods marked for enhanced scrutiny, loan terms suddenly changing for specific demographics. Look at the zip codes, Elias said, pointing to a highlighted column. Compare them to census data. Look at the denial rates versus credit scores. Naomi's fingers traced the patterns emerging from the data. Systematic discrimination. They're targeting minority neighborhoods. They're using complex financial products to hide it, pushing adjustable rates in certain areas, knowing the borrowers won't understand the terms, setting people up to fail. But why go in today? Why let them humiliate you on camera? Elias's eyes held a deep sadness. Because sometimes injustice needs a face. Sometimes people need to see cruelty in broad daylight to recognize what's happening in the shadows. Naomi picked up another document, internal emails discussing neighborhood cleanup through strategic foreclosures. Her reporter's mind was already organizing the story. The data, the paper trail, the human impact. The bank I built was meant to lift people up, Elias said, his voice heavy with purpose. To give chances to those other banks ignored. To strengthen communities, not destroy them. More documents covered the desk now. Performance reviews praising managers for aggressive acquisition strategies, bonus structures tied to foreclosure rates, training materials teaching how to deny loans while avoiding discrimination claims. Naomi looked up from a particularly damning memo, meeting her grandfather's steady gaze. The years of silence, of assumed abandonment, shifted in her mind. He hadn't run away. He'd been gathering ammunition. They turned my bank into a weapon, Elias said simply. Naomi reached for her reporter's notebook, already clicking her pen. Then we expose it. The boarding house kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people. A single bulb cast harsh shadows across decades-old documents spread on a scratched Formica table. Steam had long since stopped rising from their untouched teacups. Look here, Elias said, pointing to a yellowed page of dense legal text. Section 7, subsection C of the original bylaws. Naomi leaned closer, squinting at the faded type. Her reporter's notebook was already half full of hurried observations and quotes. I wrote this section myself, Elias continued. Everyone thought it was standard corporate language. But there's a trigger clause buried in the legal framework. What kind of trigger? Naomi asked, pen poised. If founding ownership rights are violated through proven fraud, all modern amendments to the corporate structure become void. Control reverts to the original Articles of Incorporation. Elias tapped the paper. In other words, everything they've built since forcing me out could collapse. And you wrote this knowing they might try to push you out? Elias smiled sadly. I wrote it, hoping I'd never need it. But banking isn't just about money. It's about power. I'd seen too many community banks swallowed up, turned into profit machines. I needed insurance. Naomi scanned another document, this one detailing the current board structure. But they'll fight back, hard. They already are. Across town, in a sleek downtown office building, Derek Halverson paced in front of a large screen displaying faces in multiple video windows. Harold Whitmore's legal team looked grave in their separate boxes. This is a disaster, Derek snapped. That video is everywhere. Do you know how many calls I've had to field? Calm down, Mr. Halverson, said Patricia Morton, lead counsel. Her voice crackled through expensive speakers. We're implementing containment protocols. Containment? He's the founder. People are already asking questions about why he lives in a boarding house while we post record profits. Whitmore's face filled the central window. "Derek, listen carefully. Elias Boone is a relic. He's been living in near poverty, making wild claims, causing scenes in banks." "What does that sound like to you?" Derek stopped pacing. "A mental health crisis." "Exactly." Whitmore's smile was thin. "We're filing an emergency petition first thing tomorrow. We'll paint a picture of a once great man, sadly declined, who needs protection from himself. The court will appoint a guardian, and any claims he makes will be legally worthless." "And his granddaughter?" Derek asked. "She's a reporter. A journalist chasing conspiracy theories about her mentally unstable grandfather? That's not credibility. That's desperation." In the boarding house kitchen, Naomi's phone chimed. She opened the email, eyes widening as she read. "Someone from legal just sent this," she said. "Anonymous account. They're going to petition for emergency guardianship. Call you mentally unfit." Elias nodded, unsurprised. Standard tactic. They did the same thing to Marcus Thompson when he tried to stop the merger at First Capital, and Elaine Brooks at Pacific Trust. They'll claim they're protecting me while they silence me. How are you so calm about this? Because I've spent 5 years studying their moves. We need Evelyn Shaw, the civil rights attorney, the one who won the redlining case against United Federal. Call her, now. Elias slid a business card across the table. Tell her it's about the Bright River bylaws. She'll understand. Naomi dialed, surprised when it was answered despite the late hour. She explained quickly, mentioned Elias's name and the bylaws. "Dawn," Evelyn said simply. "My office. Bring everything." They worked through the night, organizing documents into clear timelines. Elias explained each piece. The hidden ownership structures, the buried clauses, the patterns of systematic discrimination carefully obscured beneath layers of corporate policy. "Your father used to help me with the community outreach programs," Elias said softly as they worked. "Every Saturday, teaching financial literacy classes, helping people understand mortgages, build credit, plan for their futures." Naomi paused in her scanning. "I remember those Saturdays. He'd come home so tired but happy. The bank was meant to be a legacy for your family, for the community. When they forced me out, I couldn't fight back immediately. They had too much power, too many connections. But I could watch, document, wait. And now we have proof of everything." Elias gestured at the organized stacks of evidence. "They think they can discredit me, paint me as confused, unstable. But facts don't become less true just because of who presents them." A soft sliding sound interrupted them. Both turned toward the door, where white legal papers peeked through the gap underneath. Elias walked over slowly, picked up the documents. His eyes moved methodically across the pages of the injunction request. "They're fast," he noted, continuing to read. "Emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Claims of mental instability, requests for temporary guardianship, immediate freeze of any legal claims or public statements." Naomi stood. "We need to fight this." "No," Elias said calmly, setting the papers on the table. "We need to let them think they've won. Let them believe their old playbook still works." He looked at the injunction request again, his expression not worried but resolute. "Now it begins." The single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the evidence of decades of corruption, waiting to be exposed. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon when Naomi's car pulled into Eddie's Diner parking lot. The neon "Open" sign buzzed faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. Inside, only 2 booths were occupied, one by a sleepy truck driver and the other by a distinguished-looking black woman in her mid-60s, already working through a stack of legal papers. Evelyn Shaw didn't look up as Naomi and Elias slid into the vinyl booth. She finished annotating her current page, then raised sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look exactly the same, Elias," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "Thank you for seeing us so early," Elias replied, setting his worn leather briefcase on the table. A waitress approached with coffee, but Evelyn waved her away with practiced politeness. "Let's get straight to it. Show me everything." Elias began methodically laying out documents in precise chronological order. It started in 1998. The board brought in new investors, claiming we needed capital expansion. For the next hour, he reconstructed the careful dismantling of his life's work. Missing shareholder certificates, board meeting minutes with suspicious gaps, voting records that didn't add up. Through it all, Evelyn took rapid notes, occasionally asking razor-sharp questions that cut straight to legal vulnerabilities. "And here's where it gets interesting," Elias said, pulling out a yellowed document. The original Articles of Incorporation included a founder protection clause that supersedes subsequent amendments if fraud is proven, Evelyn finished, eyes gleaming. "I remember when you wrote that. Everyone thought you were being paranoid." "I was being prepared," Elias corrected quietly. Naomi pulled out her laptop, bringing up social media metrics. "The video from yesterday has over 200,000 views already. Comments are overwhelmingly supportive of Grandpa, angry at the bank. Local news is starting to pick it up." Evelyn's expression grew serious. "They'll try to control the narrative, make Elias look confused, delusional, paint you as an angry granddaughter spreading conspiracy theories. They'll weaponize respectability, suits versus street clothes, corporate polish versus a boarding house address." "They already are," Naomi said, showing them her phone. The bank's PR team had just issued a statement. "Bright River Bank is aware of a disturbing incident involving a former employee. While we sympathize with Mr. Boone's current situation, his claims about past involvement with our institution appear to stem from serious confusion. We are concerned for his well-being and hope he receives appropriate care." Evelyn's lips tightened. Classic playbook. "They'll build this narrative all day unless we move fast." She pulled out a legal pad. "Here's what we do. First, we file for emergency preservation of evidence. Everything from security footage to email archives. Second, we request a temporary restraining order against any retaliation against employees who might support Elias's version of events. Third, we demand immediate production of all historical shareholder records." Across town, Derek Halvorsen was already doing damage control. He'd called an emergency staff meeting before opening hours, his usual polish showing signs of strain. "Listen carefully," he told the assembled employees. "Yesterday's incident was unfortunate. Mr. Boone is clearly a troubled individual who needs help. Corporate HR will be providing statements for you to sign, confirming his aggressive behavior." Pam Hargrove, the teller, shifted uncomfortably. But he wasn't aggressive at all. He was actually very polite. The statement simply confirms that his presence was disruptive to normal business operations. Derek cut in smoothly. "We're helping him, really, making sure he gets proper care." Luis Ortega stood at his usual post by the door, security uniform crisp despite his sleepless night. When the HR representative approached with his statement, he read it carefully. "This says, I observed threatening gestures and hostile behavior," he said slowly. "That's not what happened." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Luis, you're an excellent employee. It would be a shame if this situation affected your performance review. Your mother still depends on our bank's health insurance, doesn't she?" Luis felt his jaw tighten, but said nothing. At her newspaper, the City Chronicle, Naomi strode directly to her editor's office. Mark looked up from his morning coffee with visible reluctance. "Whatever it is, make it quick. We're on deadline." "I need to run an investigative series on Bright River Bank," Naomi said, dropping her research on his desk. systematic discrimination, predatory lending, corporate fraud. Hold up, Mark interrupted. Bright River is one of our biggest advertisers. We'd need something rock solid. The man they humiliated yesterday? He's the original founder. I have documentation proving he was forced out illegally. And I have 5 years of evidence showing how they've betrayed everything the bank was created to be. Mark's expression shifted as he began flipping through her notes. How fast can you write it? First piece can go live by noon. Do it. Naomi's fingers flew across her keyboard, crafting a story that would ignite public outrage. Bright River's forgotten founder. How a community bank lost its soul. She wove together the viral video, historical documents, and stark statistics showing how the bank's lending patterns had shifted to target minority neighborhoods for foreclosure. At 11:58 a.m., she hit publish. At 4:55 p.m., Evelyn Shaw strode into the county courthouse, filing an emergency motion for preservation of evidence. The clerk's eyes widened at the thickness of the supporting documentation. You're cutting it close, she warned, glancing at the wall clock. As long as it's stamped before 5, Evelyn replied calmly. Justice doesn't mind waiting a few minutes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clara Watkins's small front yard. Yellow foreclosure notices fluttered in the breeze, taped haphazardly to her weathered blue door. Naomi stood on the cracked concrete path, notepad in hand, watching the elderly woman's fingers tremble as she pulled another notice down. They just keep coming, Clara said softly, her dignity intact despite the shame in her eyes. 3 this week alone. The house behind her was modest but immaculate, white trim freshly painted, flower boxes bursting with marigolds, decades of pride visible in every careful detail. Mrs. Watkins, can you tell me about the refinancing application? Naomi asked, following her inside to a kitchen that smelled of fresh cornbread and lemon cleaner. Clara's arthritic hands sorted through a stack of papers at her small formica table. 38 years in this house, never missed a payment. She pushed her reading glasses up her nose. My Norman, God rest him, made sure we always paid on time, even during the layoffs in '89. When he passed, I kept right on schedule with my teacher's aide pension. She produced a thick folder, organized with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime keeping records. The property taxes went up last year, not by much, but enough to stretch things tight. I just needed a small adjustment to the rate. My credit score is good, and the house is worth 3 times what I owe. Naomi examined the application documents, her journalist's eye catching details. Clara's payment history was spotless. Her debt-to-income ratio was conservative. By any standard metric, she was a perfect candidate for refinancing. They kept finding new reasons, Clara continued, pulling out rejection letters. First, they said my pension wasn't steady enough income. Then they wanted an assessment. I paid $400 for that. Then they said the house needed repairs before they could proceed. Every time I met one requirement, Mr. Halverson's office found another. The kitchen door creaked open, and Elias entered quietly, his face grave as he took in the scene. Clara's eyes widened slightly with recognition from the viral video. You're him, aren't you? The founder they threw out yesterday? Elias nodded, lowering himself into a chair. Mrs. Watkins, I owe you an apology. This bank, my bank, was built specifically to prevent this kind of treatment. We wrote it into our very first mission statement, to serve all communities with dignity and fairness. Naomi spread out 2 loan applications side by side. Clara's and another she'd obtained from a source, a borrower from an affluent zip code with nearly identical financials. The differences in treatment were stark. Where Clara faced escalating requirements, the other application sailed through. Where her pension income was questioned, similar retirement funds were readily accepted. Look at these risk assessment notes, Naomi pointed out. Neighborhood stability concerns, demographic shifts in lending zone, historical default patterns in target area. It's all coded language. Clara's hands trembled as she pulled out more letters, each bearing Derek Halverson's signature stamp. My neighbors got these too. The Jacksons lost their place last month. Been there since the 60s. The Ramirez family across the street is fighting their third denial. They're systematically pushing people out, Elias said quietly, using lending policies to reshape the neighborhood's demographics. Naomi's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. R.E. Watkins foreclosure. Overheard Halverson in break room. Another one down. Keep cleaning up the neighborhood, and developers will come running. Have screenshots of internal emails. Want to help? She showed it to Elias, whose expression hardened. We need more than individual cases, he said. Evelyn says we need documented proof of systematic discrimination, internal communications, policy memos, incentive structures. The archive system, he added after a moment, eyes distant with memory. In '85, I implemented a redundant record-keeping protocol. Every policy change, every directive, every amendment had to be logged in triplicate. If they haven't dismantled it, where would these records be? Naomi asked, already typing notes. Sub-basement archive room, behind the old vault. Most people don't even know it exists anymore. Clara watched them talk, her hands folded in her lap. All these years, I thought it was just me, that I must have done something wrong. You did nothing wrong, Elias assured her firmly. They're the ones who corrupted everything this institution was meant to stand for. The sound of heavy trucks rumbling down the street made them all look up. Through Clara's kitchen window, they could see moving vans approaching. Not for her house, not yet, but for another family down the block. The reality of what was happening to this community became startlingly visible. Naomi gripped her notebook tightly, jaw set. We're not letting them take her home. The evening sun painted the street in amber tones as more neighbors emerged from their houses, watching the movers work. They gathered in small groups, sharing similar stories of denied loans, of sudden rate changes, of requirements that seemed to multiply endlessly. Each story added another thread to the pattern Naomi was documenting, building a tapestry of systematic displacement hidden behind banking policies and profit margins. Clara stood in her doorway, the foreclosure notices crumpled in her hand, watching another family's life being packed into boxes. The marigolds in her flower boxes caught the last light of day, defiant splashes of color against the growing shadows. Streetlights cast a sickly yellow glow through the boarding house window as Elias spread an old building blueprint across his small kitchen table. Naomi leaned in, her phone recording, as her grandfather's weathered finger traced the bank's layout. The archive room wasn't on any public plans, Elias explained, his voice soft but clear. We built it here, behind the original vault. He tapped a seemingly blank space on the blueprint. The entrance is disguised as a maintenance closet. Most employees walk past it every day without knowing. Naomi scribbled notes, her journalist's instincts firing. Why hide it? Not hiding, protecting. Elias straightened in his chair, eyes distant with memory. After the savings and loan crisis in the 80s, I saw how easily records could disappear when convenient. So we created a secure space, climate-controlled, with triple redundancy for every document. Policy changes, loan decisions, board minutes, everything. The boarding house creaked around them, its old bones settling in the night. A car alarm wailed somewhere in the distance. If those records still exist, Naomi said, they could prove the discrimination pattern. Show how they twisted your founding mission. Elias nodded, then reached for his ancient flip phone. There's someone who can help us. Raymond Pierce. He ran operations for 20 years before they pushed him into early retirement. The phone rang several times before a gruff voice answered. Elias put it on speaker. "Raymond, it's Elias Boone." A sharp intake of breath. "My God, I saw the video today. Been waiting for this call. Raymond, I need to access the archive room, the one behind operations. Still there, far as I know. They tried converting it to storage a few years back, but that special ventilation system you installed made it too complicated. They just locked it up instead." Naomi leaned forward. "Mr. Pierce, this is Naomi Boone. I'm writing about what's happening at the bank. Would you be willing to help us?" A long pause. "Your grandfather built something special, young lady." Watching them tear it apart piece by piece, Raymond's voice hardened. "Meet me across from the bank at dawn. I know the maintenance schedule when the cameras reset." While they planned, across town in his luxury apartment, Derek Halverson paced before his laptop, Harold Whitmore's face filling the screen. "Find something on the girl," Whitmore ordered. "Past articles, retractions, complaints, anything to discredit her reporting." "Already on it," Derek replied. "And I'm handling the security guard situation. Luis Ortega. He's been reluctant to sign our version of events." "Pressure him. Everyone has something to lose." Derek ended the call and pulled up the staff files. Luis's employment record showed a sick mother, medical bills, a modest apartment he could barely afford. Perfect leverage. Back at the boarding house, Naomi refreshed her news feed. Her first article had exploded online. "Bank founder emerges to fight discrimination." Comments poured in from other customers sharing similar stories. "Look at this," she showed Elias. "The Watkins case isn't isolated. People are coming forward from all over the city." Elias studied the screen, his face tight with controlled anger. They didn't just corrupt the bank's mission. They turned it against the very people it was meant to protect. "We'll need legal grounds to access those archives," Naomi said. "Already handled," came a voice from the doorway. Evelyn Shaw stood there, briefcase in hand, looking sharp despite the late hour. "Court-approved request for specific document categories. They'll have to grant access or face contempt charges." The night wore on as they refined their plan. Evelyn prepared legal arguments while Naomi drafted her next article. Elias sat quietly, memorizing the updated building layout Raymond had texted. Finally, the eastern sky began to lighten. They gathered their materials and drove separately to the bank, parking on side streets to avoid attention. The building's glass facade reflected the dawn's pink glow, making it look almost innocent. Raymond Pierce waited in the shadow of an old oak tree, his retired security uniform still crisp after all these years. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp as he watched the early morning cleaning crew enter through a side door. "Maintenance uses that service entrance," he explained quietly. "Camera blind spot between 6:15 and 6:20 when the system resets. Guards change shifts at 6:30. Elias nodded, recognizing the precision that had made Raymond an excellent operations manager. Naomi checked her watch. 6:10 a.m. "Once inside," Raymond continued, "you'll have about 12 minutes before the first employees arrive. The archive room lock was never updated. Too expensive to retrofit the specialized door." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn keycard, its magnetic stripe still dark despite years of disuse. "Never turned this in when they pushed me out. Figured it might matter someday." Elias took the card, feeling its weight. Not just plastic and metal, but years of accumulated purpose. "This place forgot who built it," Raymond said, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgot what it was meant to be." They watched the cleaning crew finish their rounds. 6:15 approached. Evelyn gripped her briefcase containing the court order. Naomi checked her recorder. Elias held the keycard, his expression resolute. The morning traffic was beginning to build as they moved toward the bank's service entrance, Raymond's directions fresh in their minds, the weight of 30 years of hidden records waiting behind that unmarked door. The rented conference hall buzzed with tension as shareholders filed in, their leather shoes clicking against polished floors. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table, where Elias Boone sat quietly, his worn coat a stark contrast to the suits surrounding him. Naomi slipped into the seat beside him, dropping a thick folder of proxy forms onto the table. 32 signatures, she whispered. Small shareholders from the early days. Most didn't even know they still had voting rights. Elias nodded, his eyes fixed on Harold Whitmore's empty chair at the head of the table. Derek Halverson paced near the coffee station, his usual swagger dampened by nervousness. Evelyn Shaw arranged legal documents with military precision, each tab color-coded and annotated. The room filled with murmurs as board members recognized Elias, some averting their eyes, others staring openly. At precisely noon, Harold Whitmore swept in, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. His silver hair caught the light as he took his seat, offering the room a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Before we begin," Whitmore announced, "I must note this meeting's unusual nature." "Nothing unusual about shareholders exercising their rights," Evelyn cut in, her voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms. "My client holds valid proxy votes." Derek shifted uncomfortably as Naomi began distributing packets to each board member. Inside were loan denial statistics, color-coded by neighborhood demographics. Clara Watkins's case sat on top, her perfect payment history highlighted in yellow. "The numbers speak for themselves," Naomi stated, standing to address the room. "Denial rates in minority neighborhoods are triple those in comparable white areas. But it gets worse." She pulled out her phone, playing an audio clip of Derek boasting about cleaning up neighborhoods through aggressive foreclosures. His face reddened as his own voice filled the room. Elias spoke for the first time, his quiet tone drawing everyone's attention. "I founded this bank to serve all people equally. These documents show systematic discrimination." A younger board member flipped through the packet, frowning. "These denial patterns? They're rather stark." "Meaningless correlations," Derek interrupted, but his voice cracked slightly. Evelyn stood, presenting a motion for immediate oversight. "Given the evidence of discriminatory practices, we move for an independent review committee." Several shareholders began whispering among themselves. An older woman in pearls studied Clara's loan file with growing concern. "And there's more," Naomi continued, producing a printed email. "This internal memo links executive bonuses directly to foreclosure rates. Mr. Halverson received substantial payments for each property seized." Derek's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Whitmore tried to interject, but Evelyn was faster. "I move to enter this document into the official record," she declared, passing copies to the corporate secretary. Page 3 specifically mentions targeting certain neighborhoods for aggressive collection. The room temperature seemed to drop as shareholders digested the implications. A board member removed his glasses, polishing them nervously. Elias carefully opened his original copy of the bank's bylaws. Section 7, paragraph 4 states clearly, "Upon presentation of credible evidence of systematic ethical violations, shareholders may vote to establish an emergency review panel." The board secretary confirmed the clause's existence. Hands began rising around the table, shareholders requesting to be heard. "I've banked here 40 years, one man stated. "Never knew we were pushing people out like this." A woman in a blue blazer spoke up. "These foreclosure incentives, they're predatory, plain and simple." The meeting chair's gavel shook slightly as more voices joined in. Derek loosened his tie, glancing desperately at Whitmore. Naomi watched the room's mood shift, hope rising in her chest. Decades of discrimination were finally coming to light. Even longtime Whitmore allies appeared shaken by the evidence. Elias's hands remained steady as he gathered his documents. For a moment, justice felt within reach. Then Harold Whitmore rose slowly to his feet, his thin smile never wavering. The room fell silent as he reached into his briefcase, withdrawing a single sheet of yellowed paper. "This has been quite the performance," he said smoothly. "But before we continue this theatrical display, perhaps we should discuss the document that proves Mr. Boone has no shares at all." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the conference hall. The brief victory that had seemed so close just moments before hung suspended in the sudden tension. Whitmore held the yellowed paper aloft like a trophy, his manicured fingers gripping what he claimed was Elias's downfall. The conference room's air conditioning hummed as shareholders leaned forward, straining to see. "This transfer agreement," Whitmore announced, dated October 12, 1992, shows Mr. Boone voluntarily surrendering all shares to the board's voting trust. He passed copies around the table, each rustling sheet building tension. Naomi grabbed one, her journalist's eye scanning every detail. The signature at the bottom matched her grandfather's perfectly. The same slight tilt to the B, the distinctive loop in the E. Her stomach dropped. "The document is properly notarized," Whitmore's lawyer added, pointing to the official seal, "and witnessed by 3 board members of that era." Elias stared at the paper, his weathered face tight with confusion. "I never signed this," he said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. Derek Halvorson's smirk returned as he lounged back in his chair. "Memory's a tricky thing, isn't it?" Evelyn Shaw demanded to examine the original, but Whitmore's team was prepared. They projected high-resolution scans on the conference room screen, showing paper composition tests and ink dating analysis. "We anticipated this unfortunate situation," Whitmore said smoothly, "which is why we've already filed for emergency judicial review." A large screen at the front of the room flickered to life, revealing Judge Margaret Webster's face in a remote video feed. She looked stern, her black robes a stark contrast against the pale courthouse wall behind her. "Having reviewed the submitted evidence," Judge Webster began, "I am granting temporary control to the current board pending full authentication of all documents. Mr. Boone's voting rights and access to corporate resources are suspended until this matter is resolved." Naomi watched helplessly as her careful investigation crumbled. Shareholders who minutes ago had seemed sympathetic now avoided eye contact, gathering their things and edging toward the door. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "all discovery requests are stayed pending resolution of ownership claims." Evelyn tried to object, but the judge's decision was final. The video feed cut out, leaving them in stunned silence. Through the conference room's glass walls, they could see reporters clustering in the lobby. Phones buzzed as news alerts went out. Naomi's screen lit up with the first headline: "Founders claim unravels. Documented proof shows no ownership." Her editor's name flashed on her phone. "Naomi," he said when she answered, his voice tight with stress. "The bank's lawyers just called. They're threatening a defamation suit over your articles. We need to print a retraction." "But the discrimination evidence," she started. "They're saying you knowingly published false claims from an unauthorized source. They have documentation, Naomi. We can't risk it." Social media exploded. Tweets questioned her integrity. Blog posts dissected her past articles, twisting quotes out of context. Comment sections filled with accusations about exploiting an elderly man for headlines. The conference room emptied quickly. Derek made a show of collecting Elias's visitor badge, his victory evident in every movement. "Security will escort you out," he said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. Whitmore paused at the door, turning back to face them. "Mr. Boone, I truly hope you find the help you need. Perhaps your granddaughter should focus more on your care than on manufacturing scandals." The drive to Clara Watkins's street felt endless. The setting sun cast long shadows between the modest homes, making the sheriff's notices on Clara's door glow an angry orange. Moving trucks lined the curb, workers carrying out boxes of her life. Clara sat on her porch steps, a small suitcase at her feet. Her eyes were dry but empty as she watched her belongings disappear into the trucks. Decades of memories reduced to inventory numbers on a clipboard. "I called my niece in Atlanta," she said quietly, when she saw them. "She has a spare room." Naomi crouched beside her, rage building at the sight of this proud woman reduced to dependency. "Mrs. Watkins, we're not giving up. We'll find a way." A sharp notification sound cut through the evening air. Elias pulled out his phone, his hand trembling as he read the message. "They've frozen my accounts," he whispered. "Every penny." The color drained from his face. He swayed slightly, reaching for the porch railing but missing. Years of stress, age, and the day's brutal developments caught up in a rush. "Grandpa?" Naomi grabbed his arm as his knees buckled. They managed to get him back to his boarding house room, the bare walls and simple furniture a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen from his founder's office. He lay on the narrow bed, looking suddenly every one of his 78 years. "They're erasing me again," he whispered, his voice thin with exhaustion and defeat. His eyes drifted closed, the fight seemingly drained from him. Naomi stood by the window, her hands clenched into fists as she watched the last light fade from the sky. Decades of her grandfather's work, Clara's home, her own professional reputation, all apparently demolished by a single piece of paper. She turned back to the bed, fury burning away her doubts. "Not this time," she said, her voice hard with determination. The sharp knocking jolted Naomi from restless sleep. Morning light barely filtered through the cheap motel curtains where she'd crashed after getting Elias settled. Her laptop still hummed from overnight research, scattered papers covering every surface. 3 more urgent knocks. Naomi grabbed her phone, 5:47 a.m. Through the peephole, she saw Luis Ortega shifting nervously in his security uniform, glancing over his shoulder at the empty hallway. She opened the door. "Luis? What are you—" "I'm sorry it's so early," he interrupted, his voice low and strained. "But I couldn't. After yesterday, watching Mrs. Watkins." He swallowed hard. "Can I come in? Please?" Naomi stepped aside, quickly clearing papers from a chair. Luis perched on the edge, his hands clasped tightly together. "Derek pulled me into his office last night," Luis started. "Wanted me to sign a statement saying your grandfather was aggressive, that he threatened staff." His jaw clenched. "Said if I didn't play ball, I could kiss my job goodbye. My mom's medical bills, my sister's college fund, he knew exactly where to push." "But you didn't sign?" Naomi reached for her recorder, then hesitated, waiting for permission. Luis nodded at the device. "Record everything. I'm done being scared silent." He took a deep breath. "There's something bigger you need to know. The bank. We keep everything. Years of security footage, all backed up off-site. Not just the branch cameras. Conference rooms, offices, storage areas, even the executive floor." Naomi sat straighter. "How far back?" "Policy says 7 years minimum, but the actual archives go back to when they first installed digital systems in the early 2000s. Monica in IT trusted me with supervisor access codes last year when she was on medical leave." He pulled out a small notebook. "I wrote them all down, plus the vendor name and server locations." "And Derek doesn't know you have this access?" Luis shook his head. "It's buried in the system permissions. But yesterday, I overheard him on the phone with someone, laughing about Whitmore's old tricks and how it worked before. His expression darkened. Then this morning, they posted an emergency notice about accelerated document shredding for storage efficiency. Naomi was already dialing. Despite the early hour, Evelyn Shaw answered on the second ring. "They're destroying evidence," Naomi said without preamble. "Not if we move fast," Evelyn replied. "Is your witness willing to make a sworn statement?" "Yes," Luis said firmly, loud enough to carry through the phone. "Get to my office. I'll have a court reporter ready. We need this documented before they can pressure him to recant." Naomi ended the call and turned to Luis. "This is serious. Are you absolutely sure?" "I watched them force that old lady out of her home." Luis stood, straightening his uniform. "My parents lost everything in a bad loan once. I won't be part of that system anymore." Naomi grabbed her laptop, then paused. "We should get my grandfather. He might know something about the storage contracts." They found Elias already awake in his boarding house room, looking frail but alert in the morning light. When Luis explained about the footage archives, Elias's eyes sparked with recognition. "Data Vault Solutions," he said. "That was the original vendor name. I insisted on long-term backup redundancy when we first went digital. Too many lost documents in the old days." He smiled faintly. "Check under their subsidiary, Secure Archives Limited. The contract renewal would have been automatic under the original terms." Naomi's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. "Got it. Parent company still active, same storage facility." She turned the screen to show business registration records. "They can't claim these archives don't exist." Luis checked his watch. "I'm supposed to start my shift in 2 hours." "Call in sick." Evelyn's voice was firm through the speakerphone. "We need to get your statement documented now, while the evidence is intact." They helped Elias into Naomi's car, the morning traffic still light as they crossed town to Evelyn's office. The elderly lawyer was waiting at her desk, a court reporter already set up in the conference room. Luis sat straight-backed as he detailed everything: the access codes, Derek's threats, the overheard conversations about document destruction. The reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, capturing every word. "And you're making this statement of your own free will?" Evelyn asked formally. "Yes." Luis's voice was steady. "I understand I might lose my job, but keeping quiet, that means losing something bigger." Evelyn handed him the printed affidavit. "Read every word carefully. This is your shield and your sword." Luis read slowly, then signed with careful precision. The court reporter notarized it immediately. Naomi watched the notary stamp press into the paper, making it official, making it real. Her heart pounded with the weight of what they'd just gained, and what they might find in those archived recordings. Evelyn gathered the documents, her movements precise and purposeful. She looked at each person in the room. Luis with his unwavering conscience, Elias with his decades of painful knowledge, Naomi with her investigative fire. "Now we hunt the truth," Evelyn said, holding up the notarized affidavit. "With proof they can't bury." The small house on Maple Street looked exactly as Naomi remembered from childhood visits. Neat flower boxes, faded green shutters, brass numbers slightly tarnished. Martha Wilson, her grandmother's closest friend, had kept it virtually unchanged since Rebecca Boone's passing 5 years ago. "Everything's just as she left it," Martha said softly, unlocking the front door. "I dust weekly, but I never moved her things. Somehow, it felt wrong." Naomi followed Elias inside. The familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and old books wrapped around them. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, dancing across photographs of happier times, family gatherings, church potlucks, the bank's original ribbon-cutting ceremony. Elias's fingers trembled as he touched the banister. "Rebecca always said, She always told me she'd protected something important. I thought she meant memories. Where should we look? Naomi asked, noting how the house seemed smaller than in her childhood memories. The trunk, Elias said. In the bedroom. She kept everything that mattered in there. Martha led them upstairs, each step creaking familiar notes. The master bedroom remained a time capsule. Flowered wallpaper, quilted bedspread, and a large cedar trunk at the foot of the bed. Martha excused herself, understanding their need for privacy. Elias knelt slowly beside the trunk, his joints protesting. The brass latch opened with a soft click. Inside, decades of life lay carefully preserved. Wedding photos, birth announcements, letters tied with faded ribbons, church bulletins marking every Easter and Christmas service. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor, helping sort through the layers. Her grandmother's neat handwriting labeled everything: dates, occasions, names. Each item sparked a story from Elias. "This was opening day," he said, holding a yellowed photograph. "We gave out free piggy banks to the children. Rebecca insisted, said it would teach them to trust banks early. I remember mine," Naomi said. Pink ceramic with gold dots. They worked methodically through marriage certificates, property deeds, insurance policies. Everything meticulously organized, but no share certificate. "Wait!" Naomi paused, lifting a well-worn Bible. The spine felt unusually stiff. "This was Grandma's church Bible, right?" Elias nodded. She read from it every morning at breakfast. Naomi ran her fingers along the spine, feeling something rigid beneath the binding. Carefully, she opened the Bible to where a pressed flower marked Psalms. Behind it, a faded prayer card showed the Lord's Prayer in elaborate script. And beneath that, "Oh my God," she whispered. The share certificate lay pristine in its original envelope, the paper still crisp, the notary seal perfectly preserved. Dated 1978, it declared Elias Boone the majority shareholder of Bright River Bank, with specific provisions about transfer restrictions and founding member protections. Elias's hands shook as he touched the document. "She knew," he said softly. "All those years ago, when they started pressuring us, she knew they'd try to take everything." Tears welled in his eyes. "Rebecca always said, 'They can't steal what they can't find.'" "Smart woman. Your wife," came Evelyn Shaw's voice from the doorway. Martha had let her in downstairs. The attorney moved quickly to examine the certificate. "This is exactly what we needed. Original documentation that predates their supposedly valid transfer." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Marcus Thompson, best forensic document examiner in 3 states. He can compare this to their forged transfer agreement." Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Luis. "Derek ordering emergency email purge. Says it's routine cleanup, but targeting specific dates. Moving fast." "They're destroying evidence," Naomi said, showing Evelyn the message. "Too late," Evelyn replied. "Luis's affidavit already establishes their pattern of document destruction. That makes everything they delete look suspicious." Naomi stood. "I need to get to my newsroom. Public pressure is the only thing keeping them from moving even faster." "Be careful how you word it," Evelyn cautioned. "Don't tip our hand about the certificate yet." In her editor's office 30 minutes later, Naomi crafted the update carefully. "New evidence suggests the Bright River Bank controversy remains active, with multiple sources reporting document preservation concerns. Original founder Elias Boone's legal team continues to investigate ownership claims. Comments and shares exploded within minutes. Local community leaders posted support. Former customers shared discrimination stories. Justice for Boone started trending regionally. Back at Martha's house, the forensic examiner worked with precise movements, comparing the original certificate to high-resolution photos of the transfer document. He used specialized lighting to examine the paper composition, ink age, and signature patterns. Elias sat in Rebecca's old armchair, watching. The morning's discovery had transformed him. Not physically, but something in his bearing had shifted. The weight of decades of silence lifted from his shoulders. The transfer document shows multiple inconsistencies, the examiner finally announced. Paper stock isn't consistent with the supposed date. Ink analysis suggests artificial aging. Most importantly, the signature characteristics don't match Mr. Boone's verified exemplars. In other words, Evelyn said, a grim smile playing at her lips, we can prove forgery. She gathered the certificate carefully into an evidence envelope. This, combined with Luis's testimony about the video archives and their sudden document purge, she squared her shoulders. We're ready to reopen the fight. The evening sun cast long shadows through Evelyn Shaw's office windows as she arranged 5 chairs around her mahogany conference table. Files and laptops covered every surface, creating an informal war room. Elias Boone sat quietly, his weathered hands folded over the Bible-protected share certificate. Naomi paced, checking her phone for news updates. Luis Ortega arrived straight from his shift, still in his security uniform, followed minutes later by Raymond Pierce, who carried a thick folder of his own. Let's build this timeline precisely, Evelyn said, uncapping a marker at the whiteboard. We need every detail documented, every connection clear. Raymond spoke first, his voice heavy with old anger. It started in '98. Whitmore had just joined the board. Everything changed. Sudden policy reviews, new lending metrics. The pressure came in waves, Elias added, eyes distant with memory. First subtle, then overwhelming. They called emergency meetings at odd hours, always with urgent papers requiring immediate signatures. Naomi typed rapidly on her laptop, cross-referencing dates. The bank's public records show a major structural reorganization that year. Heavy transfer of voting rights. December 12, 1998, Raymond said suddenly, sitting straighter. I remember because it was my wedding anniversary. Whitmore kept Elias late, insisted on reviewing routine documentation about branch operations. Luis pulled out his tablet, fingers moving quickly through security system archives. The old camera system logged everything by date and room. Even if they deleted footage, metadata remains. He paused, eyes widening. Here, December 12, 1998, Conference Room B, 9:47 p.m. to 11:23 p.m. Multiple entries. The metadata proves they were there, Evelyn noted, writing rapidly. If we can access those backup tapes through Discovery. There's more, Luis said. The system tagged document processing events. Every time papers went through the scanner or copier, it logged it. That night shows 17 separate scanning events. Naomi leaned forward. How many documents did they claim Elias signed that night? 3, Raymond answered. I saw the file myself the next day. 17 scans, 3 documents, Evelyn mused. They were testing his signature, making multiple copies until they got what they wanted. Elias nodded slowly. They kept saying the light wasn't right. The scanner was acting up. I remember being so tired. Classic coercion setup, Evelyn said, adding notes to the timeline. Isolation, fatigue, urgency. They manufactured pressure to force compliance. Luis pulled up another screen. The backup tapes are stored at Secure Vault Services on Wilson Avenue. Company policy requires 30-year retention for all executive-level meetings. Which means the footage still exists, Naomi said, excitement building. We can prove Whitmore orchestrated the whole thing. Evelyn turned from the whiteboard. Luis, I need a detailed affidavit about the security systems, backup protocols, and metadata retention. Raymond, your eyewitness account of that period is crucial. We'll file for emergency production of those tapes. Naomi's phone buzzed. Another leak from inside, she said, reading quickly. Derek's quarterly reports. They tracked foreclosure rates by neighborhood demographics. Look at these bonus structures. Higher payouts for properties in specific zip codes. The same areas they redlined for loans, Elias said quietly. They denied mortgages, then profited from the foreclosures. Evelyn's fingers flew across her keyboard. This adds another layer. We can request federal review based on securities fraud indicators. Systematic discrimination, falsified documents, hidden incentive structures. We need to force them into the open, Naomi said. Make them defend these practices publicly. The Founder Protection Clause, Elias said, touching the share certificate gently. I wrote it specifically for this scenario. Proven fraud against founding ownership triggers an immediate shareholder review. Raymond nodded. I remember when you added that clause. Whitmore fought against it, said it was unnecessary. Now we know why, Evelyn said. We file the emergency motion tonight. Demand an emergency board meeting tomorrow. While they're defending themselves publicly, the regulators get everything, Naomi finished. The forged transfer, the security footage metadata, the bonus structures. Luis checked his watch. I can get the complete metadata logs before midnight. They don't know I have this level of system access. Evelyn began assembling documents into clear sections. Timeline evidence, sworn statements, security records, financial data. We hit them from multiple angles simultaneously. They can't bury everything at once. Elias sat calmly, watching the activity around him. The others noticed how he seemed to grow more centered, more assured, as the pieces came together. This was his bank, his rules, his foresight from decades ago finally serving its purpose. Walk me through the Founder Clause again, Evelyn said. We need the invocation to be word-perfect. Elias recited from memory, his voice steady. Upon presentation of clear evidence indicating fraudulent action against founding ownership, all current board actions are suspended, pending full shareholder review. No transfer of assets or voting rights may occur until resolution. Simple, clear, and legally binding, Evelyn noted. You built a trap door they never saw coming. The room worked in focused silence for the next hour. Raymond organized historical records. Luis extracted and formatted security logs. Naomi prepared press statements. Elias reviewed every document, adding context from his original tenure. At 11:42 p.m., Evelyn finished the final paragraph of the emergency motion. The attachment list ran for 3 pages: affidavits, evidence logs, financial records, and the crucial share certificate documentation. She looked up at the group, her cursor hovering over the File button on the court's electronic submission system. Once this goes in, there's no turning back, she said. They'll fight with everything they have. Good, Naomi said fiercely. Let them. Evelyn pressed File. The system chimed, confirming receipt. She turned to the others and said simply, Tomorrow, they won't control the room anymore. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of Bright River Bank's executive boardroom, illuminating the tension-filled space. The massive mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by leather chairs occupied by board members, legal teams, and select shareholders. Their faces reflected varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Harold Whitmore sat at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor showing slight cracks around the edges. His fingers drummed quietly on the polished surface. Derek Halvorsen stood near the window, watching news vans gather in the parking lot below, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal flowers seeking the sun. This is a waste of time, Derek muttered, adjusting his expensive tie. We should shut this down before... The double doors opened. Elias Boone entered first, walking slowly but with unmistakable purpose. His worn coat had been replaced with a pressed suit that seemed to carry decades of dignity. Naomi followed, carrying a leather briefcase filled with documents, her journalist's notebook tucked under her arm. Evelyn Shaw completed the trio, her legal folders organized with military precision. The room's atmosphere shifted immediately. Several board members straightened in their seats, their eyes following Elias's measured progress to the table. Luis Ortega, already seated in the witness area, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "Mr. Boone," Whitmore said, his voice carefully modulated, "this meeting is unnecessary. We've already established—" "Actually," Evelyn interrupted, placing her files on the table with a sharp snap, "we've established nothing yet." She removed the Bible-protected share certificate and accompanying forensic analysis, sliding them toward the board secretary. These documents require immediate entry into the official record. The secretary, a thin woman named Margaret, examined the certificate with trembling hands. This appears to be an original Class A founding share document, dated 1978. "Because it is," Elias said quietly, his voice carrying unexpected strength. "The same shares you claimed I transferred away." Evelyn produced another document. "The forensic analysis confirms this certificate's authenticity. Additionally, we have proof that the alleged transfer document is a forgery." Whispers rippled through the room. A young board member leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "What kind of proof?" "Perhaps Mr. Ortega should explain," Evelyn suggested, nodding to Luis. Luis stood, his security uniform stark against the business attire surrounding him. "I was instructed by Mr. Halvorsen to sign a false statement about Mr. Boone's behavior. When I refused, he threatened my job." He paused, gathering courage. "But that's not all. Our security archives contain metadata from the night the supposed transfer occurred." Derek's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. You can't—" "We can, and we have," Evelyn said. She nodded to Naomi, who connected a laptop to the room's projection system. The screen filled with security footage from decades ago. The date stamp clear. December 12, 1998. The grainy video showed Conference Room B. A younger Whitmore loomed over a younger Elias, pushing papers across the table repeatedly. Staff members visible in the background turned away, deliberately avoiding the scene. The audio was muffled, but clear enough. "Sign it now, Elias. You don't have a choice." Whitmore surged to his feet. "Turn that off immediately. This is privileged." "Nothing about fraud is privileged, Mr. Whitmore," Evelyn stated, her voice cutting through his protest. "And the regulatory authorities agree. They're reviewing everything as we speak." The color drained from several faces around the table. A senior board member dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. Naomi stepped forward, opening her notebook. "While we're discussing fraud, let's talk about Clara Watkins. 82 years old, perfect payment history, denied refinancing because of her zip code." She spread printouts across the table. "And she's not alone. These documents show systematic denial of loans based on neighborhood demographics, coupled with bonus structures rewarding foreclosures in those same areas." "That's standard risk assessment," Derek snapped, his composure cracking. "We don't owe loans to people who can't—" "Can't what, Mr. Halvorsen?" Elias asked softly. "Can't be trusted? Can't be worthy? That's not what this bank was built for." "This bank was built to make money," Derek shouted, his face contorted. "And if certain people can't keep up, that's their problem. We're not a charity for—" The boardroom doors swung open again. 3 individuals in dark suits entered, badges visible on their belts. The lead agent, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, spoke with quiet authority. "I'm Special Agent Carter, Federal Financial Crimes Task Force." She surveyed the room. "We're here to secure records pursuant to an ongoing fraud investigation." Whitmore's face had turned ashen. "This is a private meeting. You can't just—" "We can, and we will," Agent Carter replied. Mr. Whitmore, you're under investigation for securities fraud, document falsification, and conspiracy to commit financial discrimination. 2 more agents entered, carrying document preservation notices. Derek stumbled backward, bumping into the window. This isn't happening, he whispered. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Board members huddled with lawyers. Phones emerged as panicked calls began. Through it all, Elias remained seated, watching calmly as federal agents moved efficiently around the space, securing computers and files. Luis stepped closer to Naomi and whispered, I never thought I'd see this day. That's why they didn't see it coming, Naomi replied, taking rapid notes as the scene unfolded. They thought power meant they were untouchable. Evelyn gathered her files with practiced precision, a slight smile playing at her lips as she watched Whitmore being interviewed by Agent Carter. The evidence was overwhelming, the truth finally exposed to harsh fluorescent light. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, witnessing the dismantling of decades of carefully constructed corruption. Outside, news crews gathered in greater numbers, sensing the story breaking behind the glass walls of power. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown as news crews clustered outside Bright River Bank's headquarters. Phones buzzed with breaking alerts. Bank founder vindicated. Chairman Whitmore in custody. Security footage showed Whitmore being escorted to a waiting federal vehicle, his usual commanding presence diminished by handcuffs and shocked disbelief. Inside the executive floor, Derek Halverson packed his personal items into a cardboard box, his movements jerky and unfocused. The termination notice lay crumpled on his desk, words like pending investigation and license review standing stark against the letterhead. When security arrived to escort him out, his trademark smirk had vanished completely. Across town, Clara Watkins sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a team of lawyers and bank officials. Her weathered hands trembled as she reviewed the documents before her. "So I can stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mrs. Watkins," confirmed Elaine Brooks, the newly appointed head of the emergency restitution team. "Your foreclosure is immediately reversed. We're also adjusting your loan terms to what they should have been all along." She paused, genuine warmth in her voice. "You'll never have to worry about losing your home again." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling up. The weight of months of fear and shame began to lift from her shoulders. Outside her window, the foreclosure notice was being removed, each staple pulled free like a small act of justice. In her newsroom, Naomi Boone's fingers flew across her keyboard, crafting the definitive piece that would explain it all. Her editor hovered nearby, watching the story take shape. Bright River's Dark Waters: How a Community Bank Became a Weapon of Discrimination, and How Truth Won. The article detailed everything: the coded language in denial letters, the zip code-based lending algorithms, the bonus structures that rewarded pushing people out of their homes. But more importantly, it showed the human cost. Clara Watkins, Luis Ortega, and dozens of others who stood up to tell their stories. At headquarters, Elias Boone sat in the chairman's office he'd last occupied decades ago. The interim governance board had voted unanimously to reinstate him, their earlier resistance crumbling under the weight of evidence and federal oversight. "The reforms begin immediately," Elias announced to the assembled executive team, his voice steady and clear. "First, we establish an independent lending audit committee. Every denial will be reviewed for bias. Second, we create a community advisory board with real power, not just window dressing." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "Third, we set up a $50 million restitution fund for borrowers who were wrongfully denied or foreclosed upon. And fourth, we implement ironclad protections for employees who report misconduct. Luis Ortega, watching from the back of the room, stood a little straighter. His new position as ethics compliance officer felt like validation of every moment he'd chosen, conscience over comfort. As the sun began its descent, Elias made one final stop. He walked through the front doors of the branch where everything had started, where Derek had once mocked him in front of a lobby full of people. The space felt different now, quieter, humbler, perhaps. Pam Hargrove looked up from her station, her face flushing with recognition and shame. She remembered laughing at Derek's jokes, turning away when she should have spoken up. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, "I'm so sorry about before." Elias raised a hand gently. "The past is done. What matters is what we do now." He approached her station as she opened the new account drawer with trembling fingers. The forms looked the same as they had that first day, but everything else had changed. From his wallet, Elias withdrew a crisp $5 bill, just like before. But this time, when it touched the counter, it didn't land like a plea. It landed like a verdict, like the period at the end of a long, difficult sentence. The lobby's last customers of the day watched quietly as Elias filled out the form. His pen moved steadily across the paper, each stroke deliberate and dignified. Above the desk, the bank's mission statement still hung on the wall, its words about community service and equal opportunity no longer a mockery. Pam processed the account with careful attention, her movements almost ceremonial. When she finished, she handed Elias his receipt and temporary card. "Welcome to Bright River Bank, Mr. Boone," she said, her voice carrying a new understanding of what those words meant. Elias looked up at the mission plaque, then back at the lobby where he'd once been humiliated. Staff members watched from their stations, the weight of the moment visible in their expressions. "We're building it back the right way," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach those who needed to hear it. The automatic locks clicked behind him as he stepped out into the evening air. The setting sun painted the bank's windows in shades of orange and gold, like justice itself had caught fire and was burning away the shadows of what had been. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.